Hi, I'm Antony and I'm a year in industry student at the Genome Analysis Centre on the Norwich Research Park. It's been 6 months since I made the last video and I'm coming to the end of my placement now. I've only got about 4 weeks left to do. So in this video I wanted to look back a bit over what I've done this year, what I've learnt, and explain a bit more about my project. Okay, the project I've been working on is called MISO. It stands for Managing Information for Sequencing Operations, and that's the Lab Information Management System for TGAC. What this does is it keeps track of all the information to do with the sequencing projects that are going on here. So when a customer brings in a sample to have the DNA or RNA in it sequenced, that is entered into the system and it keeps track of everything that happens to it throughout the process. MISO looks like this. It's a web-based interface, so you can look at it just in an internet browser. And it's this is the dashboard area with a load of details of projects and libraries and experiments that are in the system. And my part of it is called the submission pipeline. What that does is all of the publicly funded work that gets done here, so the publicly funded sequencing, all the data has to be submitted to a public database. That's so other scientists can use it and use that in their research. Now, as well as the actual sequence data, we have to submit all of the metadata, which is information like where the sample came from, what it's a sample of, whether it's a plant or a microbe, or what species it is, whether it's DNA or RNA, how it's been prepared, how it's been sequenced. All sorts of information like that is really important to any researchers who want to use the data. And as I've said already, MISO keeps track of all that information. Now, previously, if you wanted to submit that to the public database, you had to create these very fiddly documents, the submission XMLs, which are very difficult to do by hand, and it's easy to make mistakes, and it also takes a long time. So what we've done with MISO is create an automated submission pipeline, which will generate all those documents automatically. So just to show you what I mean, if someone was using MISO and it had got to the point where the sequencing was finished and they wanted to submit the data, all they need to go do is click Prepare New Submission, put in a title, say and put in an alias. So, just for the sake of argument, I'm just going to use the same thing here. And you want to add these data files to the public database. So then you can just choose the project that you want to submit, and it will show all the sequence data files that are stored in the system here. So you choose the ones you want and click Save. Right, so here is all of the data that's stored on the system about that project. So the name of the study, who's leading it, the name of the samples, what experiments were conducted, what runs were involved in the data files. And all of this stuff is generated automatically. And then when you're ready, you can submit it by clicking that link. It'll also validate the data, make sure there's no mistakes in it. So if you click that link there, so at the minute there are a few because we're still getting the last few details of the system sorted out. So it'll tell you what's wrong with it there. And then once you're ready, once you've got that sorted out, you can submit the metadata, submit the sequence data, all with one click. And that saves an awful lot of time over generating it all by hand. Okay, so to explain a bit more about the technical side of how MISO works, MISO is written mostly in Java, but it has a web front end which is built using JSP and HTML. That produces the sort of nice user interface that you've seen earlier. The middle layer of it is written in Java, and that models all of the objects in the system. So things like the sequencing machines, the samples, the sequencing runs, flow cells, experiments, all of that stuff is modelled in Java, which is quite handy because it's a portable system. It can run on different computers, on either Mac or Linux or Windows. And then the back end of it, the third layer, is a MySQL database, which stores all of the information more permanently. So that was already sort of, when I was working on this system, that was 3 technologies to get my head around, which I hadn't really used before. Also, because they're quite different technologies, you have to have an interface layer in between each of them. So between the web front end and the Java layer, there's an AJAX layer. It's the kind of thing you have on Facebook, which makes people's chat messages and status updates pop up on your screen without having to reload the page. So that's what we use to open menus and get information from the database without reloading the page. And then there's a DAO layer, which is a database access object layer, which enables the Java layer to get information from the database and to store information in the database. And often when you want to add a new feature to it, you have to go through all of these layers, which is quite a challenge, but it's really interesting now that I know how to sort of follow that path right through from the front end, right through to the database and back again. So there's been quite a lot to learn over this year. A lot of the time I felt like I don't quite know what I'm doing, but then there's little moments where I do know what I'm doing, which are quite nice. But it's only sort of when I've stopped and looked back over the whole year I've realised how much I've learned while I've been here. So I suppose in MISO, right from the Java server pages and the AJAX, improved my Java programming a lot. Then how to use a JDBC on the Spring Data Access Objects, how to alter a MySQL database, and then various other things like using FTP servers. I've installed an FTP server and FTP client in the system to upload data, and also using Linux. I kind of forgotten now. I was completely unfamiliar with when I got here, and I was a little bit nervous about because nothing seems to work how you expect it when you're used to Windows. But yeah, now I've got a lot more fun of it, and I kind of feel like I know what I'm doing more. Also using a Spring framework was something I've never heard of before coming here, and that's made it a lot easier with a big, relatively complex software project. To configure it, you just need to write an XML to configure it. I've also learned to use the Maven Java build tool and Subversion, which is a version control software, which is really useful if you're working in a team like we are, with several people working on the same code, because it keeps one central storage of the latest copy of the code. And then you can kind of download bits and edit it and then upload it again when you're finished. As well as the programming skills and the computer skills that I've learnt while I've been here, one of the other great things about being at TGAC is all the opportunities I've had. For example, we get talks every month from really leading scientists in their area. I've been to a talk by someone from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation about some of the research that they're funding into sort of curing diseases in the third world and improving crops. Had a talk from Colles Juma, who is a real leading figure in improving African agriculture and biotechnology in Africa, and lots of other people. In fact, during one of these talks, I found my final year supervisor for my final year project, who's John Wayne at UEA, which is great because that's an opportunity I wouldn't have had if I wasn't here. He was doing a talk about fighting antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and I just went along to it and got chatting to him afterwards, and now I have a really interesting final year project. So that's been good. Also, at the end of this month, I am going to be able to present a poster in a national conference about next-generation sequencing up in Nottingham, which again is an opportunity I definitely wouldn't have had if I hadn't have been here doing my year in industry.